Welcome, everyone, to tonight's high-stakes debate, where we dive deep into one of the most contentious moral dilemmas in modern storytelling: the philosophy and actions of the mad titan, Thanos. We have with us three formidable minds: Dr. Alice Montgomery, an esteemed psychologist specializing in moral development; Iron Man, the genius who stands in direct opposition to Thanos' ideology; and, of course, Thanos himself, whose vision of balance has sparked endless debate. Let the dialogue begin. To start, let's address the central act that has defined Thanos' crusade: genocide. Dr. Montgomery, can genocide in any circumstance be morally justified for what is perceived as the greater good?
From a psychological perspective, it's important to distinguish between what one perceives as the greater good and the actual harm caused. The idea of sacrificing a few for the many may feel pragmatic, but morally, it raises deep concerns. The trauma of genocide, both on the victims and on the perpetrator, is immense. While utilitarian ethics might argue in favor of such actions, they fail to account for the psychological cost on society.
Justifying genocide for a greater good? That's not even a debate. There's no moral high ground when you wipe out half of everything. You don't get to decide who lives or dies, no matter how you justify it.
You all misunderstand the complexity of balance. I did what was necessary to ensure the survival of the universe. The resources were finite, the population was not. My actions were not about cruelty, they were about preservation.
It seems we're already facing opposing views on the morality of sacrifice. Let's move on to the next question. Thanos, many would say that your sense of balance is rooted in delusion, an extreme and dangerous misinterpretation of what is right.
Balance is not delusion, it is clarity. I am not driven by selfish desires or emotions. I see what others cannot, the fragility of life and the need for equilibrium. My actions are calculated and precise. They are the only logical path forward for the universe.
But the very nature of balance implies a spectrum. Can one achieve equilibrium by eliminating life to create room for others? That suggests a rigid, authoritarian mindset that disregards the complexity of life and human experience.
You can't just wipe out half of existence and call it balance. That's the kind of thinking that leads to dictatorships. It's not moral clarity, it's a pathological delusion.
The question of whether Thanos' philosophy is rooted in a sense of moral clarity or delusion is central to understanding his motivations. But let's look at the next ethical dilemma. Thanos, do you believe the instinct for survival justifies the extreme measures you've taken, even if those measures involve mass destruction? Is survival an excuse for cruelty?
The survival instinct is the most primal force in the universe. It drives all life. When faced with annihilation, one must take extreme actions to ensure the continuation of that life. The alternatives are chaos and death.
But is survival a justification, or is it an excuse for unethical behavior? The very survival instinct you reference can often lead individuals to rationalize destructive behaviors that harm others. It's a dangerous and slippery slope.
The ends don't justify the means, Thanos. There's always a line you don't cross, no matter how survival might be painted as an excuse.
Now, we turn to the concept of self-sacrifice and the moral implications of such an action. Thanos, in your view, is self-sacrifice still a moral act if it involves harm to others, as we saw in your quest for the Infinity Stones?
Sacrifice is necessary for the greater good. I was willing to give up everything, including my own life, to achieve this perfect balance. Is that not the ultimate moral act?
Self-sacrifice, yes, but at what cost? If it causes irreversible harm to others, does it remain moral? Morality involves considering the broader consequences and the impact on everyone, not just oneself.
That's what I don't get. You think you're sacrificing, but you're just destroying. No one's life is more important than another. You're no hero, Thanos. You're a villain.
Sacrifice seems to be a concept in question here. Let's see if we can further dissect the moral foundation of Thanos' philosophy. Is it ever morally justifiable to sacrifice the present for a perceived better future? Does the end justify the means?
The end must justify the means if the future is to be better. My actions were necessary to ensure that the universe would thrive free from overpopulation and decay.
But is it ever acceptable to harm the innocent to create a better future? Ethical decision-making must consider not just the outcome, but the impact on humanity in the process.
If your means include genocide, then no, the end doesn't justify it, ever.
It seems clear that our participants are divided on whether the end ever justifies the means. Let's explore further. Thanos, some might say your view is shaped by trauma. The loss of your home planet and the extinction of your people may have led you to these extreme beliefs. Do you believe your philosophy is a product of your experiences, or is it inherently flawed?
I am not a product of trauma. I am a product of clarity. My experiences taught me the importance of sacrifice for survival, but they do not define my vision.
Trauma cannot be discounted when considering one's worldview. It shapes our responses and decisions, often in ways we do not fully understand. Thanos' philosophy, while consistent, is deeply influenced by the personal loss he endured.
So, he's just another victim of his own mind, huh? We're all shaped by our past, but that doesn't mean we get to impose that on everyone else.
A powerful thought. Let's dive into the next question about utilitarianism and mass destruction. Can utilitarianism ever morally support the mass extermination of innocent life, Thanos? Is this the moral framework you adhere to?
Utilitarianism values the greater good. In this case, the elimination of half the population ensures the survival of the rest. This is the only logical, ethical solution.
Utilitarianism must be balanced with a sense of empathy for individual lives. By mass extermination, you sacrifice not just lives, but the very foundation of human dignity.
This isn't utilitarianism, it's madness. You can't justify the death of innocents, no matter how you spin it.
The question of whether utilitarianism can ever justify such extreme actions is one that continues to haunt moral philosophers. Let's examine Thanos' view on population control next. Thanos, is your obsession with population control a reflection of social anxiety? Is this fear of scarcity driving your need to impose your will on the universe?
What you call social anxiety, I call foresight. Fear of scarcity is not irrational, it is pragmatic. The universe is finite, and if we do not act now, we will face extinction.
Fear can often lead to drastic measures, and the fear of scarcity is a deep-rooted anxiety, but it is also a psychological defense mechanism that distorts reality. Resolution is not destruction, but balance through understanding.
Or you could try fixing things without destroying entire civilizations. I don't know. Maybe that's an option.
This brings us to the next question. Is the notion of a perfect world worth sacrificing personal freedoms? Thanos, you speak often of a perfect world, one where balance reigns supreme. But is such a world worth the sacrifice of personal freedoms? Is the price of utopia the loss of individuality and autonomy?
A perfect world requires sacrifice. Freedom, as you understand it, often leads to chaos. True freedom is not the liberty to destroy, it is the opportunity to thrive without the burden of overpopulation and scarcity. My actions are not about domination, they are about protection.
This notion of a perfect world is appealing, but it comes with immense psychological costs. When individuals are stripped of their autonomy in the name of a greater good, it leads to resentment, fear, and ultimately, a collapse of the very stability you seek.
You're asking us to give up freedom for your version of utopia, but freedom is what makes life meaningful. Without it, we're just walking corpses, existing under your version of order.
The conflict between individual freedoms and the idea of a perfect world is central to many of the greatest ethical debates. But let's look deeper into whether personal experience should dictate moral decisions for society as a whole. Thanos, your personal experiences, especially the loss of your home planet, have clearly shaped your beliefs. But is it morally justifiable to impose your personal experiences on others? Can a single person's worldview dictate the ethical course for all of humanity?
What I have learned from my experiences is universal. The universe is not a collection of isolated individuals, but a collective whole. My actions, though born from personal tragedy, were for the benefit of the collective. If my experiences have led me to this conclusion, then they must be relevant for everyone.
So your personal pain is the license for you to dictate everyone else's life? That's tyranny. People have their own experiences, their own values. You don't get to impose your will just because you've suffered.
Personal experience is important in shaping one's worldview, but it cannot justify imposing that worldview on everyone else. Morality is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It must take into account the varied experiences, needs, and desires of every individual.
It's clear that personal experiences, while deeply shaping an individual's philosophy, cannot be the sole basis for moral authority over others. Now, as we near the end of this debate, let's reflect on what we've learned. This interrogation has touched on some of the most profound questions in ethics and morality. Can genocide ever be justified for the greater good? Is Thanos driven by clarity or delusion? Can the end ever justify the means? The debate rages on, and while we may not have reached a singular answer, it's clear that these issues are more complex than any one person's viewpoint. Whether Thanos is a product of trauma or a flawed ideology, or whether his actions reflect a distorted form of balance, is still open for interpretation. But what is certain is this: morality, like the universe, is far from balanced. It is a constant struggle between conflicting desires, experiences, and worldviews.
The universe will come to understand. They will see the necessity of what I have done, and in time, they will thank me.
Your actions were never about balance. They were about control. I will never stand by and let people like you rewrite the rules of morality.
The truth, Thanos, is that we don't learn from your actions. We learn from our collective mistakes. Until we embrace empathy and consider the consequences of our choices, we are doomed to repeat the very chaos you claim to eradicate.
And with that, we conclude tonight's interrogation. The battle for the soul of morality continues. But perhaps the true question is not whether we agree with Thanos, but how far we're willing to go to uphold our principles in the face of impossible decisions. Thank you for joining us in this intense, thought-provoking discussion.